Today we're going to look at a TSA training that covers best practices in air cargo safety. As we begin, let's cover a little bit of background information about TSA. TSA is responsible to protect the U.S. air transportation system from terrorist threats. Their primary goal is to ensure the freedom of movement by air travel for both people and cargo. The TSA has set up security procedures that must be followed by companies like Cal Sierra that deliver cargo to the airlines for transport. TSA also conducts random inspections at trucking companies to ensure security procedures are being followed. This training covers everything you need to know to successfully perform your duties when receiving or delivering air cargo. In order to understand this training, you need to know some key terminology used by TSA. The first one is IED, Improvised Explosive Device. An IED is a homemade bomb designed to destroy, incapacitate, harass, or distract the public. IEDs are used by criminals, vandals, terrorists, suicide bombers, and insurgents. IEDs come in many forms, ranging from a small pipe bomb to a more sophisticated device capable of causing massive damage and loss of life. A big part of TSA's program for trucking companies is to make sure drivers know how to look for and see things that look unusual that could be an IED. The second term is IAC, which stands for Indirect Air Carrier. An IAC is any company other than an airline which participates indirectly in air transportation by booking or delivering cargo to the airline for transport. A direct air carrier is an airline which flies the cargo plane. Cal Sierra is considered an IAC. We don't fly the airplane, but we do deliver cargo that will be flown on the plane, and so in that sense we are indirectly contributing to the air transportation system because we're delivering cargo to the airline. The next term is IAC-SC, which stands for Indirect Air Carrier Security Coordinator. Each indirect air carrier must designate and use an indirect air carrier security coordinator. The IAC-SC is the primary point of contact for security-related communications with the TSA. At Cal Sierra, the IAC-SC is our safety manager. SSI stands for Sensitive Security Information. This is information that, if publicly released, would be detrimental to transportation security. Employees of an IAC like Cal Sierra have special obligations to protect this information from unauthorized disclosure. What you're going to learn in this training is something that you need to know to do your job, but it is considered sensitive security information, and therefore it's not something that you should just talk about with others randomly if they're not part of the transportation industry. The purpose of this training is to help IACs know what they can do to help counter terrorist threats. Number one, IACs need to submit STA applications to TSA and then obtain TSA approval prior to allowing employees to perform security-sensitive duties. So as a new employee, you've already applied for an STA, but maybe you haven't received that STA number yet, and so you're not going to be allowed to have unauthorized access to cargo areas. You're going to be with a trainer until you are cleared 100% to operate on your own. IACs also need to inspect cargo at the time of acceptance. This is a key responsibility that every driver has, to look at the freight that they're receiving to see if there's any causes for concern. 3, we need to control access to cargo in a warehouse or staging area, and that's why we keep all of our exterior doors locked, we keep roll doors down, and we keep scissor gates closed. IACs also need to follow the known shipper requirements. We don't receive freight that's going on airlines from just any company. They need to be registered in TSA's database as a known shipper. 5, we need to secure cargo with a lock, seal, or escort during transport. We don't want to have any cargo areas open and accessible to people who aren't STA cleared. And then 6, we need to report suspicious activity or cargo to the appropriate authorities when it's encountered. Here in this TSA regulations, you can see that there are current security procedures in place mandated by the TSA, and that these security procedures are designed to help IACs deter threats from occurring. And then it lists several things that IACs need to be doing that we just covered. They need to make sure that everybody who has access to cargo areas has a valid STA, that cargo needs to be inspected at the time of acceptance, that cargo facilities and staging areas need to be controlled so that no one with unauthorized access can get to that freight. They need to follow the known shipper requirements, and they need to apply security measures when cargo is in transport. Part of the TSA training is to take a look at real-life explosive incidents that have occurred. And they do this just to underscore the fact that these threats are real. And you can see in this example that in October 2010, 2 packages, each containing a bomb of 300 to 400 grams of plastic explosives and a detonating mechanism, were found on separate cargo planes. And these planes were UPS and FedEx. So these threats can happen anytime, anywhere, to any airline. And as a trucking company who supplies freight to the airlines, we want to make sure we're on the lookout for threats of this nature. One of the best ways to learn this material is to go through some practice questions. So let's look at one. It says, when referring to an improvised explosive device, IED, the acronym PIES refers to A, a power supply, incendiary, explosive material, and timer. Well, this one doesn't make too much sense because timer doesn't start with an S, which is the last letter in PIES. So B says plastic explosive, incendiary, explosive, and switch. So that's a possibility. C, power supply, initiator, explosive material, and switch. So that's a possibility. Or D, none of the above. So let's take a look at the material provided by TSA to see if we can get an answer to this. So you can see right here in the TSA provided training materials that the acronym PIES stands for P, power supply, which is a battery of some type. I is initiator, which is a blasting cap, for example. E is explosive material, maybe plastic explosive, dynamite, things of that nature. And S is a switch or timer. Examples of this would be an alarm clock or an electric switch. So if we go back to the question, we'll be able to then pick the correct answer. Taking a look at the question again, we've already ruled out A, and so we look at B, which says plastic explosive, incendiary, which is not what we just saw in the TSA materials. It was initiator, and then explosive, and that's also not what was listed there. It was explosive material, and switch. So we can safely rule out B, and that means that our answer is going to be C. PIES stands for power supply, initiator, explosive material, and switch. You can see in this little example here that this is an actual IED assembled, and it's got the power supply, the detonator or initiator, explosive material, and a switch or timer. All right, let's take a look at another question. As an authorized representative of an IAC, you must maintain direct custody and control of the cargo from the time of acceptance until transferred to another regulated entity. And another regulated entity could be another IAC, so we may pick up the shipment and then take it to another IAC. We could take it to a screened cargo facility, or we can deliver it directly to the airline. But the question is that whether or not we have to maintain direct custody and control of the cargo from the time we accept it until the time we transfer it. Probably the best guess on this one is true. Why would TSA say we don't have to maintain direct custody? That doesn't make sense at all if we're going to have a secure system to control who has access to cargo. But let's take a look at the regulations. Here it is in the regulation. The authorized representative must maintain custody and control of the cargo following the measures in this section from the time of acceptance until the cargo is transferred to another IAC or aircraft operator. So there's your answer right there. Taking a look at the question one more time, and we can see that the answer to this question is true. This question says, signs that a cargo shipment has been tampered with include exposed wires or leaks. That's a possibility. Content inconsistencies. That's also a possibility. Maybe somebody took something out and added something in and it doesn't look right. Or C, both A and B, or D, none of the above. If we were to take a guess on this one, I'd say both A and B, which is going to be letter C, but let's take a look at what the regulation says. You can see here in the regulations that signs of tampering are exposed wires, leaks, content inconsistencies. That's what was in our question. But there's some other things as well, like fresh scratch marks or an inordinate weight or balance issue with the freight. Or it might be unusual smells or leaks. Or there may be an odd piece that doesn't match the rest of the cargo tendered. Could be size or weight or the look of the cargo item is not consistent with the items that are described on the waybill. So there's a lot of different things that you can look for and see, and when you do see them, it's really important that you bring it to the attention of a manager right away. So if we go back to the question, that signs of a cargo shipment has been tampered with include, and you can definitely see there that the answer is going to be C, both A and B, exposed wires, leaks, or content inconsistencies. Here's another question. It says, sensitive security information, or SSI, can be shared with, and then it gives you 3 different choices. Only employees, authorized representatives, and subcontractors with an operational need to know. B, all IAC employees, authorized representatives, and subcontractors. And C, whoever shows interest in the information. Well, C doesn't make sense at all. Why would you just talk about something security sensitive with any random person? So it's going to be A or B, but we'll need to take a look at the regulations just to be sure. And here you can see a reminder that security begins with protecting information, knowledge, and procedures, and that all this information that we're learning from the TSA about air cargo security is not to be shared with persons without a need-to-know basis. So when we come back and look at the question, we see sensitive security information can be shared with, and A seems to be the most logical choice because it has that phrase in there, need to know. Only those employees, authorized representatives, and subcontractors with an operational need to know. B, we would eliminate because it says all without any qualification. And what TSA wants you to be aware of is that you just don't want to randomly share information with anybody. If they have a need to know, then it's okay to share with them. If they don't have a need to know, then just keep that information to yourself. Okay, here's another practice question. If ID verification is required, the following is acceptable forms of ID, and then it gives you 4 choices. A photo ID issued by a government authority, or an SIDA ID, media issued by an airport operating within the U.S. And that sounds like it could be reasonable. An expired driver's license, that doesn't sound reasonable at all, so we could probably eliminate B just from a common sense standpoint. C, A photo ID issued by a company for which the individual tendering the cargo is an employee or authorized representative. That sounds pretty reasonable. And then D, both A and C above. So if we were to guess, we'd probably say the answer to this one is D, because we know we've eliminated B, and A and C appear to be pretty good possibilities. But let's take a quick look at the regulations. So you can see here in the regulation that there's option 1, a photo ID issued by a government authority, or an SID AID issued by an airport operator within the United States. That was our option A. And I like it here how they just put that an authorized representative must verify that the ID is a true representation of the individual. It seems like common sense, but a lot of times we just look at an ID and then we don't look at the person and compare, does the photo on the ID match the person that we're looking at? And then option 2 is a photo ID issued by a company for which the individual tendering the cargo is an employee or an authorized representative. And then option 3 says nothing about an expired driver's license, so again we know we can eliminate that. When we look back at the question, we can see that the answer is going to be D, which is both A and C above. We eliminated B because an expired driver's license doesn't make much sense. Why would TSA allow somebody in the chain of custody process if they don't even have a valid driver's license? So there's two situations in which this will come into play. One is going to be when you are delivering cargo either to an IAC or the airline. They're going to ask you for your ID, and it's got to either be your government ID, which is your driver's license, or it's got to be your company ID, which is going to be your STA badge. And then if somebody is dropping off air cargo to our warehouse, then you have to ask them for their ID, and that's again going to be a government ID, or it's going to be their company ID. So those are the two situations in which this is going to come into play. Here's another question. During non-operational periods, the authorized representatives must ensure that blank doors giving access to the cargo are secured or controlled to prevent unauthorized access to the cargo. And then it gives you three choices. A is cargo, B is all, and C is office. Make your guess, and then we'll take a quick look at the regulations. And you can see right here in the regulation, it states, during non-operational periods, the IAC and the authorized representative must ensure that all doors giving access to cargo are secured or controlled to prevent unauthorized access to cargo. And then they show you three pictures. They show you a closed dock door, they show you a scissor gate that's closed, and then they show you dock doors that are not closed and there doesn't appear to be anybody in the area. And this is a common tactic that TSA uses when they audit a facility. They show up into the yard and they're looking for an open scissor gate or an open dock door to gain access to the freight. And if they get on that dock, then it could be a violation and we could be subject to a fine. So when you're done your work at a dock door or a scissor gate, make sure you close it. Or if you just happen to be walking out on the dock and you see open roll doors, go up to those roll doors, find out if anybody's working. Check with the dock workers and see, is there anybody at this door or not? And just do your part in helping make sure that the warehouse always stays secure. It's something that we're all responsible for and we all need to be on the lookout for. And when we go back to the question, you can see that obviously now the answer is going to be B, which is all. All doors giving access to cargo need to be secured or controlled to prevent unauthorized access to the cargo. So if you're working at a door, that door is controlled. Nobody's going to get up in through that door if you're there working without you challenging them. But if nobody's working at the door, then it needs to be down and secured. Here's another question. The authorized representative must ensure custody of their cargo using which methods? And then they give you 4 choices. Assigned personnel instructed to monitor the cargo, which is basically the same way of saying an escort. A locked vehicle or container. A sealed vehicle or container. Or D, any or all of the above. So let's take a look at the regulation to find out what's the best answer here. And you can see here in the regulation that the authorized representative must store and transport cargo using one of the methods specified below until the cargo is tendered or transferred to an IAC or an aircraft operator. And you can see that the 3 methods are monitor, which is to be an escort, or to lock, or to seal. Looking at the question again, we can see that the answer is going to be D, all or any of the above. You can either assign somebody to monitor the cargo, you can lock your vehicle or container, or you can seal the vehicle or container. And it does have to be a tamper evident seal. A zip tie doesn't count. Here's another question. If cargo appears to be tampered with, or unauthorized explosives, incendiaries, or other disruptive substances or items are discovered, the authorized representative must do what? First option is A, maintain positive control of the cargo. Well, that seems pretty reasonable, because if there's something wrong with the cargo, why would you give it to someone else? B is notify the IACSC, and if you remember from our terminology, the IACSC is the Indirect Air Carrier Security Coordinator, and at Cal Sierra this is the Safety Manager. So notify the IACSC and appropriate local and federal authorities per the notification procedures. So that makes sense. If you see something, then you need to say something, and you need to say it to the people who have some authority to do something about it. C is do not transport the cargo until responding authorities concur that it does not present a threat. That also seems pretty reasonable. So if we were to make our best guess here, it's going to be D, all of the above, but let's take a look at the regulations just to confirm. Okay, looking at the regulation, you can see that the IAC must maintain positive control of the cargo. It must immediately notify the Indirect Air Carrier Security Coordinator, or alternate. Alternate would be the federal authorities. But if you notify the Safety Manager, then the Safety Manager is going to take it from there. And then finally, the IAC is not to transport any item until responding authorities concur that it does not present a threat. Going back to the question, you can see that our guess of D, all of the above, is correct. The next question says, at the time cargo is accepted, the IAC must visually inspect the exterior of all cargo for signs of tampering, true or false. And again, just common sense is going to tell us that the answer is going to be A, which is true, but let's take a quick look at the regulation. And you can see here in the regulation that upon physical acceptance of cargo for transportation by air, the cargo must be visually inspected for signs of tampering that may render the cargo unsafe to transport. Here's some helpful information that explains what is an external visual inspection. And you can see that a visual inspection must include the top and all sides of the cargo that's visible. So when you're picking up or you're receiving freight onto the dock and it's air cargo, you need to take a close look at all sides and the top. You need to walk around it. You can't just take a quick glance and say it's all good. But you don't have to break the cargo down because that's not required. And you also don't have to open the cargo because that's not required either. You just have to make a good, solid visual inspection of all sides of the cargo and the top. When we go back to the question, we can see that the answer is true, that all cargo that's going to be traveling by air needs to be visually inspected. Here's another question. To report an incident and suspicious act that could affect U.S. civil aviation, you should immediately notify who? A. Family and friends. That doesn't sound too logical. B. The IACSC and appropriate local and federal authorities. That sounds pretty reasonable. Or C. No one, keep it to yourself. That doesn't make any sense at all. The guideline is if you see something, you need to say something. You're not just going to talk to friends and family about it, so B is probably going to be our best answer, but let's take a look at the regulation. And you can see here in the regulation it says all incidents and suspicious activities that could affect U.S. civil aviation must be reported immediately to the security coordinator of each IAC whose cargo may be affected. And then again, they give you that good reminder that if you see something, you got to say something. Here's another helpful slide, because sometimes when you see something and you need to say something, you can't get a hold of the security coordinator, so then what do? And you can see here that it says notify the appropriate authorities as outlined below. For security-related incidents, suspicious activities, or threat information, immediately notify the federal security director or designee at the airport closest to where the cargo is located. So as a reminder, if you see something, say something. Going back to the question, and you can see that the answer is going to be B, the IACSC, and appropriate local and federal authorities. Okay, that's the last of the practice questions. We do have a few final thoughts and important things to remember. Number one, you need to have an STA number to handle air cargo. And anyone who's in our warehouse needs to have an STA number to handle cargo, unless they're being accompanied by someone who has an STA number. So if you see somebody in our warehouse and you don't know them and they're trying to access an air cargo staging area, it's your responsibility to challenge them and ask them what they need. Number two, always inspect air cargo for suspicious threats when you pick it up or receive it on the dock. And remember, that inspection needs to be thorough. You need to look at every side and the top. 3, keep cargo in your truck secure at all times with a lock or seal. Number 4, always keep roll doors, entry doors, and scissor gates closed when not in use. Remember, this is a favorite tactic of TSA. They come to a logistics warehouse like ours. They're looking for roll doors and scissor gates that are unattended. They're going to try to get access onto our dock without being challenged, and if they're successful at doing that, then that's a violation and we could be subjected to penalties. 5, report any security concerns to your dispatcher or manager immediately. Then your dispatcher or manager is going to contact the IACSC or the federal authorities and ask them what are the next steps that we need to take. And then lastly, if you have any questions, ask your dispatcher. It's better to ask and get it right than to guess and be wrong. Thanks for your time, and I hope this training's been helpful. This training has ended, and you need to complete your official TSA test now.